with various status of residence and employment, from working and professionals, students, academics, entrepreneurs, and so on. Going back to the idea to optimize the potentials of Indonesian diaspora, including Indonesians in Japan, it is important, I think, to identify first the situations in the country of residence, such as socio-political context, the labor market characteristics, and also the immigration policy. In the context of migration to Japan, it is interesting to discuss because most people don't really associate Japan with immigration or immigrant country, while in fact, like more and more immigrants are coming to Japan. Like as of last year, December, there are almost 3 million foreigners in Japan, including Indonesian, who make living and working in Japan. In today's webinar, we are going to learn from our speakers Japan's experience in handling the increasing presence of foreign workers. Some questions such as who are the immigrants in Japan? Where is the position in Japan's labor market? What is the relationship between Japan's immigration policy and its changing labor market? How it paves the way to for foreign professionals, including Indonesians, to enter the labor market, and finally, how can we reflect what Japan's labor market means for Indonesian nationals? What kind of opportunity that we can we can be welcoming? All these questions, right, will be discussed and addressed by our speaker today, Professor Farrer. Now, let me introduce today's speaker, Professor Gracia Liu-Farrer. Professor Farrer, thank you for accepting our invitation today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's my great pleasure to be here online.
All right. Professor Farrer is a professor of sociology at the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies, Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan, and also the director of Institute of ASEAN Migration at the same university. Her research mainly focuses on immigrants' economic, social, and political practices in Japan, and also the global mobility of students and professional migrants. Currently, she investigates how the globalizing labor market restructure migrants' career, as well as redefine the meanings of work, and how firms in Japan deal with the increasing presence of such mobile workers. Among her latest publications is the book Immigrant Japan, Mobility and Belonging in Ethno-Nationalist Society, published by Cornell University Press in April this year. Congratulations, Professor Farrer, for your book. She's also the author of Labor Migration from China to Japan, International Students, Transnational Migrants in 2011, and also co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of Asian Migrations, published in 2008 and 2018. All right, that's all the introduction from me. And before I hand the mic over to our speaker, I'd like to clarify the flow of today's seminar. The speaker, Professor Farrer, you will have about 50 to 60 to 1 hour to talk, and then followed by 2 sessions of Q&A. The first Q&A session will be for diaspora research team, and the second will be for the audience. All right. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Farrer, our speaker, to give her talk. Okay, Professor Farrer, please, the time is yours. You may use the screen share.
Yeah, thank you very much, Firman, for your kind introduction. And again, it's my great pleasure to be here, even though we are together virtually, but I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share some of my research and information about the migration situation in Japan. So I'm going to share the Oh, I'm so sorry. I have just updated the system. It needs me to allow sharing. Okay, just a second. Okay, let me see. Very sorry about this. Let me try again if I can share. Oops. It seems, okay, it's a little bit kind of complicated. All right, here.
Right.
Can everybody see? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, today I was asked to talk about foreigners in Japan's labor market, and also with the subtitle, what can Indonesia learn from foreigners' experiences in Japan's labor market. I have never studied Indonesians in Japan. I think Firman is more of an expert on that, but I just want to share some general knowledge of Japan's labor market and immigration policy, and especially skilled migrations, and also what other nationals fare on Japan's markets and some of their economic. Okay, so the outline for today's presentation is basically the three main parts: Japan's labor market and immigration policy, and foreign workers' locations on Japan's labor market, and then Japan's labor market and what it means for Indonesians. So basically, the last section is some of my thoughts based on what I have observed on Japan's labor market. So first of all, let's take a look at Japan's labor market. So I think people here probably know that Japan is the oldest country in the world. And Japan is really facing a demographic crisis and very severe labor shortages. Japan actually by 2018 already had over 28% of population older than 65. Now the percentage is increasing. And from 2000 to 2017, Japan's labor force reduced from 67.66 million to 65.56 million, basically a net loss of over 2 million. And you can see on the right-hand side, there is this graph. It might be kind of tricky. What this graph shows you is the population of the productive labor force, which is between 15 to 64 years of age. And in Japan, this productive labor force is actually now less than 60% by 2019. So Japan is really facing a very severe labor shortage. You can see the percentage of workers who are older than 65 were actually 10% of the labor force in Japan right now. I don't know if many Indonesians work beyond 65, but most Japanese old people actually still working. And the influence, in many countries, the economic influence of COVID-19 is very severe. And you can see actually on the right-hand side, you have also like US employment rate goes over like 10% or 12%. But in Japan, actually, at least by the end of April, and also most recent figure by the end of June, there is still quite high job vacancy ratio and very low unemployment rate. So even the COVID has not, alleviated Japan's labor shortage problem. However, even though Japan has a need for labor, what Japan's labor market actually looks like is, you can see the graph on the left-hand side. Japan's labor market, in a sense, is segmented. There are two kinds of segmentation. First is between so-called irregular or non-regular employees and regular employees. So by non-regular employees, I mean those employees who are working part-time, who are on, very kind of terminal contracts, who don't have, kind of job security, say, okay, you can work here indefinitely. So, the segment of non-regular employment in Japan has increased. So you can see 2018, 2019, you can basically about over 30% of the labor force are non-regular employees. So Japan is famous for having so-called the long-term or lifetime employment, but that actually hasn't really increased, and it remains stable. In fact, after 2000, it has become a smaller segment of the labor market. And non-regular workers on average earn less than half of what a regular employee does, and are also the first to be dismissed. So they're very kind of a precarious situation. And also in Japan, because of this kind of so-called internal labor market, Japanese companies hire those regular employees from the college graduates or high school graduates as soon as they graduate, so new graduates, and they kind of let them go from the bottom to the top through the within the firm, so that you don't have a lot of transfer between firms. Because of that, a lot of non-regular employees, if you miss the chance of becoming regular employees, you cannot really easily become, regular later. So it's really a very segmented. And the other kind of segmentation of Japanese labor market is between big and small and medium-sized firms. The kinds of situations for big firms and small medium-sized firms are quite different. So big firms, as I said, they tend to recruit from new graduates, and they have higher salary and more job stability. And the smaller medium-sized firms are, first of all, they are less competitive on the job market. So a lot of people don't want to go there. And they also have a lower salary and more job turnovers. And the graph on the right-hand side, you can see actually the top line shows that how many jobs are available for each person. So basically, for example, for the last cohort, this is from Recruit Institute. For small and for firms with fewer than 300 people, you all have almost 10 jobs and only one applicant. And this year they have 8.6 jobs for one applicant. That's really, really quite a a shocking situation, right? So basically 9 jobs will not be filled. And why this year is lower? Because the firms decided, okay, we are not competitive. The new graduates don't want to come to our firms. So they try to see if they can get, transfer people. So they have changed strategy. But what this line indicates is that in Japan, on Japanese market, the small and medium-sized firms are starved for labor. So they really need a lot of people to work for them, and they don't have enough workers. And larger firms, the last line, the purple line, you can see actually they have one job. So basically more than 2 people competing for one job in large firms. So that's the Japan situation. And Japan's labor market is such as, just keep in mind, you have a non-regular and regular, and you also have, small, medium-sized firms and large firms. And Japan's immigration policy essentially wants to recruit the sort of highly skilled people and feed them to the regular employment system. And they try to get a lot of the so-called lower skilled people to be on kind of more secondary, more non-regular kind of a track. So what Japan actually, because Japan has been holding on to its ethno-nationalist image, so we are kind of homogeneous country, we don't need immigration. They have been really resisting the idea of immigration, at least politically and discursively, even though immigration is coming, is happening, but they deny it. So, but their labor migration policy reflected that kind of mentality. So they're very reluctant to accept labor migrants, so-called, so-called low skill. I don't like to call them low skills because everybody's skill is very valuable, right? People work on construction site probably is highly skilled. And so just because they do manual work doesn't mean they're low skilled. But this sort of kind of workers are imported through so-called side doors, not like front doors, welcome as labor. They're welcome as trainees or technical interns or, equal partner agreement programs. And those programs, because they're not labor, they're very difficult for them to convert visas. And so they're very temporary. So basically these people are coming in to work on the non-regular employment tracks. But at the same time, Japan, as all developed industrial societies, they want to recruit highly skilled workers. And Japan, in fact, has the shortest residency requirement in the world for permanent residency. It's 1 year. If you get 80 points, you can actually become permanent resident in Japan after a year. So this is more favorable than any other countries. They also actively recruit international students, partly because Japanese is not a kind of dominant foreign language. They understand in order to fill the skilled labor market, they need education. So Japan has always been very active in promoting international education. And currently about 35% of the international students who graduate from Japanese higher education became employed in Japan. So that's actually higher than OECD average. Then in Japan, in order to, because the severe labor shortage, what they have also done is try to stretch what's considered skilled workers. So for example, there's specified skilled workers that the government passed, the immigration reform, and the government passed in the end of 2018, that started from April 2019, for the first time allowed so-called manual workers to come in. So 345,150 foreign workers in 14 categories of occupations to be working in Japan. And also, Japan, starting from last year, from May, they started to use so-called designated activity visa. They're very flexible. So if you're domestic workers working for an expat in Japan, you will be on that visa. If you're a student looking for a job in Japan, you will be on that visa. If you're technical interns and your employer wants to keep you for another year, you will be on that visa. Now they want to use this visa to allow a lot of students who don't have so-called specialized skills to work in Japan, like in hospitality service. As long as you speak Japanese, you can get this visa in working in hospitality service. What this all means is Japan is actually increasingly opening up labor migration channels. And in the so-called SSW, the specified skilled labor, right now, the biggest feeder is technical interns. Also the government, starting from early this year, calling for those students who have lost the student visas or technical interns who ran away from the employers to apply for this SSW visa. So what Japan really is doing right now is trying to get more people to work in Japan one way or another, and try to see if they can keep people in Japan without calling themselves immigration country. So these are the kind of the hierarchy of the legal categories of immigrant labor. You have a highly skilled professional. It's a point system. You have to have a 70 point or above. For example, you graduate from elite university in Japan, like Waseda counts, and many other kind of salary. And also, if you're younger, you're younger than 30, you actually have higher points. So all that sort of point system means that you will be qualified to get highly skilled professionals. Right now, this category is mostly occupied by the Chinese. The second is engineer, humanities, international services, education, all those so-called skilled workers visa, and also specified skilled worker number 2. Nobody is in that category yet. So basically, these are what we commonly consider as skilled work visa. A lot of Indonesian workers are in that, as over 2,000 of them are in that category. And you also have specified skilled workers. Right now, only have actually 3,000 people in this category because they have trouble recruiting people. And then you have the bottom labor category is technical intern. I think most of the Indonesians in Japan are in that category right now. So, what I try to emphasize, or try to point out, is that Japan's selective immigration policy do not really satisfy the labor and skill shortages that's shown or demonstrated on Japanese job market. According to, this is actually Teikoku Data Bank, it's one of the large industrial survey company, data company. They report that actually most of the employers want regular employees. You know why? Because they want to train workers, even though they're manual workers, they want to train them and work in Japan for, long term. The technical interns or or other categories do not allow those labor to stay in Japan for long enough to be truly skilled and useful workers. So, you can see on the left-hand side, this bar, the regular employees, actually what the firms report labor shortages, and more than non-regular employees. But Japan's labor policy actually feeds most of so-called manual workers to non-regular sector. So regular employment is actually a sector that needs more labor. So you can see here is the top 10 industry who are in short of so-called labor, regular employees. On the left-hand side, you can see also red marks, the construction, transportation, warehouse, which includes a lot of so-called blue-collar workers, and the agricultural, forestry, fishery, which actually what a lot of Indonesian trainees or technical interns are working in. But these sectors need regular employees. And so technical interns are not regular employees. They're temporary. They're just like supplemental. So, this is what it means. The Japan's system right now is not helping the real labor market. So it is changing right now. That's why SSW is kicking in, but SSW right now is not flourishing. So I think I spent a lot of time talking about the labor market. Now I'll quickly talk about foreign workers' location on Japan's labor market. This is 2019's Ministry of Health, Labor, Welfare's chart of the number of foreign workers that this employer reported. Now employers are obligated to report how many foreigners they hire. On the right-hand side, you can see professional technical activity-based status. This is what we call skilled visa. So people, for example, engineers and humanities and all those people are in that category. And the top category is, the top national in that category is China, it's Chinese. So you have about 115,000 Chinese who have engineer or those visas. And Indonesian right now, is 4,759. It's an increase from previous years, but still is not very large. And given the population of Indonesia, there's a lot to consider there. And then you have the next is technical intern training, which is actually a quarter of the labor force. This actually is not even considered real labor, it's training, right? But that's how Japan's side door is used for importing labor. Here, the top nationality is Vietnam, and Indonesia occupies quite a bit, in quite a large segment in that. And on the left-hand side, bottom side, there is another category. It's called engagement in other activities. And most of those people are actually current students, because students are allowed to work 28 hours per week in Japan. So they, most of them work. And And Indonesian occupied 5,291 in that category. Is not large because Indonesian students are not that large in Japan. But Vietnam, right now, there are more Vietnamese students working than the Chinese, even though Chinese student population is higher than the Vietnamese. So because a lot of Vietnamese are in language school and vocational schools, and a question and something I would mention. So you can see as Japan's labor market is like this, and Indonesian nationals are mostly in so-called professional, in a training session, and there were some students in the skill session. And this is actually from my book, Immigrant Japan, I have just published. In the book, I have a chapter on the work in Japan, so immigrants' work situation in Japan, and I look at the immigrants' work situation, and I allocate them into, it's basically, it's kind of two-way table. There are different kinds of a market. And so there's a primary and secondary labor market. For those of you who study labor economics or labor sociology, as well as who do the classic international migration, you probably understand the primary labor market are those labor market that have secure jobs and provide benefits. Is that what Japanese people tend to say is regular workers, regular employment. And the secondary are those people who work on contracts and more precarious work and part-times or kind of home. Actually, you work at home and not very secure. You don't get much of insurance and all that sort of social securities. So these are two broad patterns. But among immigrants, you can also see some of them work on the national labor market. By national, I mean that their jobs don't have much to do with outside of Japan. So they're hired as regular Japanese or regular employees, as similar to Japanese employees. There are different in the primary labor market. You can see just regular employees, like what in Japanese they call seishain, maybe just working in a Japanese bank or working in a Japanese company or manufacturer, do what Japanese people do. And typical incumbents, typical people who fall into those categories are graduates from Japanese universities, or you have other intra-firm transferees, and a lot of engineers and IT professionals recruited from overseas also work, in those kind of sectors. And you have secondary ones. You can have secondary ones, which you have like convenience store cashiers. A lot of students, part-time workers work in those, places like a bento factory, baking lunch boxes, or service industry working as janitors. And so these are typical. I'm not going through in details all these incumbents, but there's a sector called the global sector, with global or transnational, whose economic practices have a lot to do with, say, with China or with Indonesia or with their home country or with some people, with the market outside of Japan. And so also people who tend to be in that categories are university graduates from Japanese university, or, they're similar to national, but a lot of international students or international workers, they would like to work in the global sector because they feel their cultural resources, the bilingual, their multilingual competencies can be put in much better use. And they have advantage because Japanese people don't speak very good foreign languages, so they have advantage. So a lot of international people want to be in that sector. In Japan, there used to be a so-called foreigners track to attract those people, but now because of the labor shortages, the labor market is more general. But still, international graduates want to go there. And also, we have a secondary labor market. You have more dispatched, hakken workers or dispatched workers, and all that people. And also, we have obviously ethnic market. For example, you have a Chinese restaurant, or you have Southeast Asian ethnic cuisine and language schools, ethnic stores. Those ethnic business, you have owners, who probably are stable, but you also have wage laborers who are on the secondary labor market. I also discovered there's ethnic plus global. You know, sometimes it's hard to differentiate whether it's ethnic or it's a global. You know, you do a lot of, for example, Chinese software companies, they also dispatch Chinese workers into Japanese firms, but they use a lot of ethnic networks to do that. And the Korean trading firms, they trade between Korea and Japan. You know, it's a transnational, but they maybe cater to a particular niche market. So these people are oftentimes people with, you know, who have stayed in Japan for longer. They have a more cultural and social capital. Of course, you also have ethnic global that in the secondary labor market, which are part-time language teachers and domestic helpers. The reason I put domestic helpers there, in Japan, domestic helpers are oftentimes, for example, Filipinos or Indonesians who are brought in by the expats. And those people, oftentimes you look at their career trajectories, they have been working in Singapore, working in Dubai, and working in Japan. So they are very global, but they are also a kind of ethnic niche. Okay, this is actually what I lay out, and I find that the immigrants oftentimes work in these different sectors, and of course you can strategizing where you want to work for. I think this is some the strategies I've observed among the immigrant workers. First of all, it's niching, finding your niche. Of course, given that the Japanese labor market is in dire need of manpower, supplementing manpower is one way of doing it. It's a very traditional immigrant role. However, in people with more education and also with more vision, they try to find so-called niche, occupational niche that could utilize their ethnic transnational resources. For example, like Chinese have always wanted to work in Japan's transnational business. This has to do with China's relationship with Japan, economic relationship. And what I see is that right now, in fact, Southeast Asia is Japan's target market. But somehow this, this niche, occupational niche hasn't been fully kind of utilized by the Southeast Asian, workers. So this is something I think they could consider. The Chinese actually is very active in this transnational business, and including small and medium-sized firms. They actually help a lot of small and medium-sized firms in Japan rely on those foreign workers to expand their business or to source their, materials through these people. The other niche is ethnic entrepreneurship. Of course, some of the immigrants, they see, oh, okay, now more immigrants are coming, so I can open some businesses, for example, halal food for the Muslim community. And also I can do this, for example, one of the Korean migrants, Korean people, immigrants I interviewed, opened a driving school for immigrants, because there's no other driving school that allows people to use different languages and tell them how to get a driver's license. So she actually profits from that. And the other related strategy, which actually just kind of try to explain what some of the occupational niche might lie, is bridging. I call bridging the structural holes. Structural holes is a sociological concept proposed by Ron Bird from University of Chicago. What this structural hole indicates is that people have different networks. You can see the image on the right-hand side. You have different kinds of networks, but for example, there's networks in Japanese business and networks in Indonesian business, but they don't connect. But if you work in Japanese company, and you actually know you have friends, you have co-workers in Indonesia company, you might be the person that occupy this structural hole. We can keep these two, can bridge these two networks. And according to Ron Bird, whoever that occupies the position in the structural hole, or you can fill that structural hole, you can do a lot of, he calls them literally entrepreneur. So you have a lot of resources to mobilize, and you can bridge these networks, and you can make your own business, or you can actually, make something out of it. You're a beneficiary by your structural position. Of course, in order to bridge this structural hole, you have to have multicultural capital, and also you have the social capital. And I see a lot of, at least when I studied Chinese migrants, a lot of Chinese migrants, they first worked in Japanese companies, small companies or medium-sized companies. They didn't see themselves working in Japanese companies forever, because immigrants love to have their own business, to be their own boss. Japanese companies are actually quite, oppressive or constraining in terms of culture and practices. So what they do is that they learn how to do business in Japan, and they also discover, and they could actually do a lot of things with China. So what they have done is to establish this sort of entrepreneurship, transnational entrepreneurship, to focus on software companies, trading companies, or or service companies, all kinds of companies. And they're small, but they're doing that sort of business between countries, and they take advantage of their structural positions. And so the last part is my reflection on how Japan's labor market and could maybe, give some hints or give some ideas to the Indonesian migrants. First of all, I didn't present this figure. You can see in Japan, the international migrants are increasing. So, as Firman mentioned, by the end of last year, it's close to 3 million, and the increase quite fast. And please keep in mind, there's another 500,000 immigrants who have naturalized in Japan. And the Chinese is the top nationality, and followed by Korea, Vietnam. Vietnam increased within this 5 years. Basically, they tripled, not just tripled. They were like over 10 times. So within a decade, they increased population by 10 times. And I'll explain why Vietnamese increased so quickly in Japan. And the Filipinos, they kept quite stable. And Brazil actually is kind of flat and also decreasing. Nepalese is another nationality that's increasing quite fast. And Indonesia is increasing, and I think it has now become 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, seventh nationality, largest nationality, surpassing Thailand, Taiwan, and the United States. Taiwan is right after Indonesia. So what I have observed is that education is a path to skilled labor market. And it's the surest path to skilled labor market. As I mentioned, a third of international students actually got a work visa in Japan. In fact, the Japanese government wants to increase that number to 50%. However, the among the top foreign student population, Indonesians are not that high. And so I'm wondering why. You guys, I could discuss with you why the number is not up yet. The reason why the Chinese and now Vietnamese increased so fast. The Chinese increased very fast in late 1980s and throughout 1990s, and in the Vietnamese, it was after 2010, is because the migration industry. A lot of brokers actually work with Japanese language school or vocational school and try to recruit students, and now Nepalese as well. So language education is actually a migration industry, is a industry-driven student mobility. This is actually, I'm not saying it's a good, I'm very ambivalent about this. because they mislead students, and because in Japan you can work up to 28 hours. In Vietnam you will have banners, oh, you can make up to 2,000 US dollars a month. So a lot of students just go to Japan in order to work, right? And sometimes in a lot of failed cases and become undocumented. So it is a kind of issue. However, it has effectively channeled in a large number of students. And I think the reason why Indonesia is mostly occupying the training, technical intern section and the lasting other section, partly because Indonesia has a developed labor migration industry. You have a lot of brokerage, industry that help labor brokerage, like domestic workers or all kinds migrant workers, but you don't have maybe I don't know. You can tell me whether you have a developed international education industry. And the other thing that I can see from other, especially Chinese and Koreans experiences, and including also the Vietnamese, is the finding niche in the global and transnational economy, because Japan does have a very rigid employment system, and it has a high language and cultural barriers, especially for Southeast Asian students. And from my observation, like Vietnamese and also Nepalese, they have a lot of difficulties in learning Japanese and going to Japanese universities, especially good universities, and enter the kind of primary labor market. And the number is increasing quite fast, but most of them are still working. So are Chinese, are working in smaller and medium-sized firms. But still, it's a step in. And so what's important is you try to, through, when you get your foothold in, try to see what actually is, advantages. So global transnational economy is given that Southeast Asia is the biggest, is a really main target of Japan, and Japan tries to shift emphasis from China to Southeast Asia. I think there's a lot of potential there for Southeast Asian students to gain employment. There's a survey done by my Navi a couple of years ago among employers. Most of them still want more international students, and the biggest demand actually is Southeast Asian students instead of Chinese students. So I think this is something that I think we can discuss. Okay, so I think I'm done with my section. I'm very happy, I would be very happy to discuss with you, and some of the issues you probably have questions about. Some I see some people have already raised hands and also had questions, so I would be happy to discuss with you. So I will stop share, and if you want to go back to the slides, we can share. We can go back to the slides again. So.
Thank you very much, Professor Farrer, for your presentations. It gives us like a big picture of what is happening now in Japan's labor market. I